Hey everybody, it's Mr. Samples here. I first want to start off this video with a huge compliment to all of you students. You guys are doing an excellent job with this Cold War and wrapping your minds around it and putting yourself in the situation and taking in all the information. I'm very impressed. You're doing a really, really excellent job. This video is going to be on the collapse of the Soviet Union. It's going to cover the causes, the people, the technology, and the reforms that all led to that collapse. The collapse of the Soviet Union was perhaps the most dramatic event since World War II. This collapse marked the end of the Cold War. For over 70 years, the communist government of the Soviet Union maintained a totalitarian grip over its own people, as well as over the people in its satellite nations. Political dissent was not tolerated, and human rights were not protected. The collapse of the Soviet Union had many causes. The desire of Soviet citizens to be prosperous and free was perhaps the most important of these causes. An additional cause for the collapse of the Soviet Union was the arms race competition with the United States and the effects that it had on the Soviet economy. While the Soviet Union was collapsing due to the arms race, the United States economy was booming due to the production during the Cold War, which ultimately led to the great economic prosperity of the late 20th century. The main contrast between these two nations were not the political or economic ideologies, but how those ideologies formed each country's citizen consumer. Americans enjoyed a high standard of living. The American consumer had a wide range of choices in selecting food, clothing, housing, and entertainment. In contrast, the Soviet consumer had fewer choices. In the Soviet Union, government planners decided how many each good should be produced and distributed out to the people. Heavy government spending on military often meant reduction in spending on consumer goods. Milk, soap, meat, bread, and even toothpaste, all considered basic consumer goods, were in short supply. People had to stand in long lines in order to purchase these items. In the early 1980s, the United States declared it would begin the construction of a new weapons system called the Strategic Defense Initiative. This system would use advanced technology to protect the United States from attack by missiles, largely in response to the Cuban Missile Crisis. Because this technology used satellites positioned in space in order to detect incoming missiles, SDI soon became known as Star Wars. Soviet leaders would soon realize they cannot match this advanced technology. Due to the troubled affairs within their own communities and homes, foreign affairs, as well as economic ineffectiveness, citizens called for political and economic reforms. In 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev became leader of the Soviet Union and soon announced a new policy titled Glasnost, also known as openness. Soviet citizens were now free to speak openly, criticize the government, and read previously forbidden books. A second new government policy was called Perestroika. Perestroika permitted individuals to own land and factories. Central government planning gave way to new local and private planning as well as investing. I like to call Gorbachev's reforms the revolutionary reforms, because both reforms were revolutionary to how Soviet citizens were capable to freely choose many life decisions. The way in which government officials were elected were also reformed. In a policy called democratization, non-communist party members were allowed to run for office. In 1987, President Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev began reducing the costly arms race for each country. and agreed to ban certain types of nuclear missiles. This was in the year 1987, 4 years before the collapse of the Soviet Union. Ultimately, the revolutionary reforms would weaken the Soviet Union and lead to its collapse.